Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to this training. My name is Jessamine, and I work at Bayaud Enterprises in the Career Center and just altogether in our Career Discovery and Development program. I'm really happy to see you here, and I'm really happy to introduce Tim Goldstein, who is been gracious enough to do his second class for us. This class will be on whether or not you should disclose your disability, some tips, whys, hows, with kind of a Q&A towards the end, with a lot of more personal experience. So just as some background about Tim Goldstein, he is a communications specialist, has had many jobs and has so much experience on what it is like to fit into the professional world as someone on the spectrum. He has written an amazing book that I don't have with me right now because actually someone on this call has it and she is reading it, called Geek's Guide to Interviews, 15 Critical Items for the Technical Type. I highly recommend you reading that book. If you want us to mail it out to you so you can borrow it, just reach out. I'll put my email in the chat so that you can let me know. I'd be happy to mail that out to you so you can borrow it and read through it, and maybe it would help you or someone that you know. Okay, so I'm gonna let Tim take it away. Tim, thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Jasmine. Today, as Jasmine said, this is going to be a little less formal presentation and a lot more question and answer. But first, just to kind of give you my thoughts and ideas about it, which might help prompt some good questions and answers. I was going to go through a little piece that I just recently put together that's 10 tips on, disclosing things that you should think about. But first, just to see if I can make my computer work here. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Right button. Yes, I am a geek. I am in the computer industry. I do work for Google. But that hasn't been what I've done my entire life. I, have been in IT about 25 years, but I've only been diagnosed and known that I was autistic for about the past 6 years. So I went through most of my career not knowing I was autistic. And because of that, I ended up getting fired quite a number of times, which is where I got skilled at interviewing to write the interview book. And also I got pretty skilled in coming up with different ways to disclose and figuring out when it was advantageous to me and when it wasn't. So through all that tragedy of being fired so many times, there's actually some really good nuggets that have come out of this. So when we talk about disclosing, the first thing really comes down to, before you even worry about any of, what are the techniques, what should I do? Is there more I should do than just, blurt out that I have, X, Y, Z, is really decide, is disclosing for you? And again, I think we're going to probably get a lot of questions around this and talk around it more. But to me, the main points around is disclosing for you comes down to one of two things. One thing is, and I think we're all familiar with this, is there anything in it for me? If I'm going to a little company that does no particular programs that are oriented towards, the disabled, and I don't see anybody, disabled around the place, probably disclosing isn't going to help you in the interview any. I'm making a little bit of a judgment there, but it tends to be smaller businesses and such just aren't as familiar. I mean, there's a few that are wonderful and embrace different disabilities. Unfortunately, that isn't everybody. So, you think about, what is it going to get me? Am I going to an employer that disclosing has some kind of advantage? And often people don't think that there is advantages to it. But if you're going to a government agency to apply for a job, they are very good about trying to hire more people that are disabled. I mean, there's target numbers and such. Companies who are federal contractors are trying to hit percentage targets of the number of disabled people. So they're actually actively trying to find them. So that's a situation where, okay, this company wants disabled people, so maybe it's my advantage to let them know up front I am, even though I might be able to get through the interview without having to get any accommodations. And again, I want to really hold these Q&A, just dig into the ones that are important to you. So I'm just going to say that on that one and leave it for questions for later if people want to dig deeper on it. Now, if you do decide that disclosing is for you, and it may be because you need to disclose because you need an accommodation to get through the interview process. Personally, I disclose for a different reason. The reason I disclose is just type Tim Goldstein into Google and you'll find out really fast I'm autistic. And I would much rather have that be delivered in the way I want it delivered in this, with the messaging I want, as opposed to some potential hiring manager Googling me and finding out that, oh my gosh, Tim's autistic. I don't know if I could handle an autistic person. So that's my particular reason. Doesn't, fit everybody. Some people, the reason is that's who they identify as. They're autistic. They identify as autistic. And if the company can't accept them as being autistic, it's not going to be a good fit. So they just almost use it as a filter. I'm autistic. If that works for you, great. If it doesn't, that's great too. But at least we know we're not a good fit with each other. But now that you are going to disclose, it comes down to have a plan for disclosing. How are you going to disclose? At Google, we actually have a group of autistic individuals that we get together twice a week, virtually, of course, now, and we just discuss different things. So I asked the group about disclosure just to get just some different thoughts on it. And one that I thought was really funny, which is the one that's actually quoted here, if you can read the little letters, which one of the gentlemen said, yeah, I really don't have a plan. It's kind of like, oh, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings. By the way, I'm autistic. That's not a very good plan, that all of a sudden in the middle of something, you just blurt out that you're autistic. So we can talk through more of what a plan would be like. And again, that's something that probably questions for your specific situations will be more sensible than just the general, other than knowing you should have a plan how you're going to go about doing this. Then the context. You've got to think about the overall context of the people that you're disclosing to, and that disclosing is not a complete event by itself. And when I say the context, many people do not know what adult autism looks like, and worse, they don't even know what adult male autism looks like, much less adult female autism. So you may be disclosing to somebody where you're telling them that you have autism, and they don't know what that means. All that comes to their mind is, some, child, generally a boy, and that's their picture of autism. So remember, when you disclose, that the context, they're not likely going to understand what this condition is. So part of your disclosing needs to be letting them understand what you're disclosing about. And then, as it says in the bottom one, disclosures is it's only a start. It's not the end, because the way the laws work and such, if you go and disclose to HR cannot go to your manager and tell your manager, oh, by the way, you have an autistic employee. If you want to now let your manager know that you're autistic so that they would have a better way to work with you, you have to disclose to them individually by yourself. You can divulge to as many people as you want, but they cannot share the information themselves. So that, is one point where you can see that disclosing is a beginning. It's not an end, because sooner or later, you're going to get transferred. So your manager is going to change or something like that. You're going to go to a new job and you're going to have to do it all over again. So essentially, once you come out and start disclosing, you just need to remember it's an ongoing job of letting people know, and in new situations, letting the new people know if that is what you're comfortable disclosing to them. And again, you only need to disclose enough to handle the situation at the level you're comfortable. There's no rules that say, disclosing means you've got to give them your complete medical history. It can be as simple as, I have this condition called autism. That's it. You don't have to say any more. You just disclosed. Explaining you. I've found this is a super, super important part when you disclose. And again, it goes back to that concept of most people don't understand autism. I think if we were to walk out, on the streets back when we could all walk out the street safely, if we were to walk on the streets downtown and just start asking people about, tell me when you think of an autistic person, give me a description. I think you're going to hear male, white child. It's going to be the overwhelming description you're going to hear. And even if I'm wrong, it's still not going to be a description that's probably you. It's going to be a TV description of some TV character that was, only partially based on the reality of being autistic. So that's why it's so important that you have to explain you. Saying I'm autistic is great, but saying I'm autistic and here's the places I have challenges, and here's how you can help me, and I can do more for you. So one is, I say, create your disclosure narrative. You want to really sit down and think ahead of time, how can I tell this story in a way that shows my strengths and highlights the strengths that I'm bringing because I do think differently, while at the same time minimizing the fact that there may be some challenges that they need to accept. I mean, you're not telling about them, but you're not making those into a big deal. And if you have that worked out as a couple-minute story ahead of time, you can work it, with friends. You can work it with, if anybody's helping you on your job search, they can all help you refine that. Because what I have often seen is what an autistic individual thinks that they should use as their narrative is not a narrative that will land real well with a neurotypical. So that's why you want neurotypicals to look at your narrative to say, yeah, that one really, I get it. It makes sense to me. So that's on that. As far as explaining strengths and challenges, I like to use, and I have at the end here, a couple slides, a form that I actually use. And it was a form that I developed with Vanderbilt. And it has 10 different, very common autistic challenges on it. And the idea is you cross out the ones that don't apply to you. And then you can simply walk into your manager or HR or whoever the person is, and you can hand them a sheet. And that sheet now is coming across with credibility. I mean, it's got Vanderbilt's name on it. That makes it pretty credible right there. Secondly, you're not just saying I'm autistic, you're saying I'm autistic, and the ones I scratched out, those are actually strengths because I don't struggle with them. The ones I didn't scratch out, those are the ones we need to figure out and find ways that we can bridge over them and make it work well for both of us. So to me, using tools like that makes it much, much easier to explain your strengths and your challenges. But again, just go from the standpoint, the person doesn't understand autism. In general, the world doesn't understand adult autism very well at all. So if you don't tell them what you're strong in and where the challenges are, they're going to go on an assumption, and almost always that assumption will be far worse than what whatever you would tell them would be. So from responsibilities, I think if you're going to disclose, that you're actually taking on some responsibilities. And one of the responsibilities that you're taking on is disclosing is not an excuse. Just because you disclose, you can't go around going, oh, sorry, I spoke out in the meeting. You remember, I'm autistic. You can't use it as an excuse. Disclosure is so that people can understand how to work with you better. And potentially for, legal, you need, some different supports that require you to disclose, whatever. But disclosure, it should never be an excuse. Just because you're autistic doesn't mean that it's appropriate to act inappropriately in a meeting. There's some things you've just got to follow the norms, and that's the way it is. And if you're autistic, maybe saying, it's a challenge for me and I'm working on that, but I know it's something I need to overcome. You're not using it as an excuse. You're just saying, okay, I have a little more barrier, but I know it's something I've got to get through and make work. Then I think another thing that's super important that often doesn't happen is, the manager, the HR, whoever gets the, I'm autistic. They know nothing about it, and nobody gives them any resources where they can actually go look up what are modern companies thinking about autism and having autistic individuals working in them. And there's tons of good material and quotes and websites of companies with programs that you can show. But I think it's super important. If you don't give them additional materials, how are they going to even understand that when you said I'm autistic, what does that really mean? So the trick is you're not going to educate them all by yourself. You're going to give these materials so they can educate themselves as they have the chance. Then disclosing takes effort. And if you're going to disclose, there's some things that you should probably go, learn about. You should learn about, what are the company's policies? This is assuming you're disclosing after you got hired on this particular point. What are the company's policies? What are their approaches? How do they handle ADA requests? How do you, let somebody know in the proper department that you are in one of the protected categories? That takes work. You got to do research. You got to go find out what are their DEI efforts. Do they handle it through there? Do they handle it through HR? So do your homework. You want to make sure that you disclose to the people that it's going to matter if you need it later. And then I think the biggest one to me is disclosing is not a free pass. Just because you disclose doesn't mean that you can just keep being you exactly the way you are and expect all over the world and the company to totally change for you. Should you expect them to give reasonable accommodations? Of course, that's the law of the land. They should give you reasonable accommodations. But reasonable accommodations is something like a noise canceling headphone. Reasonable accommodations isn't, hey, I'm autistic, so I'm just going to be abusive to everybody. That is not a reasonable accommodation. So again, just remember, just because you disclose, it doesn't get you off the hook of you still need to socially interact with these people you work with daily. And just because they know they're autistic doesn't mean that they won't at times take things you may say in wrong ways and be offended. And that's when you got to go back and have the effort of saying, remember, I said I was autistic. I'm sorry, that was, but they already knew ahead of time. You're not using it as an excuse. You're explaining more of what you had told them originally. Then this, even though it's probably too tiny to see, is the self-advocate disclosure form that I was just speaking about. And I've used this myself. Since I created this, I've had 2 different managers at Google. And in meeting both of those managers, well, actually I had 3 managers in Google. So in meeting my first new one and my second new one, I actually used this exact sheet. And it's kind of funny, it's my sheet and I still used it wrong. With the first manager, I just sent her the PDF and I didn't mark which ones were the ones that I didn't struggle with so that she could know which ones are the bigger challenges. And it was really funny because next time we had a meeting, what she asked was, could you mark the ones that are actually the real challenges for you? Which to me said she found value in the sheet because now she wanted to identify the specific ones she needed to pay attention to. Second boss, his answer was, this is wonderful. I wish every employee would give me an owner's manual to how to work with them. So the reception I have found is very, very positive. Managers like to know what they have to deal with and not have to figure it out when it's a negative, situation. And with that, we're down to some questions. Let me drop the screen share here and I'm going to try this pause share and see what happens.
Thanks, Tim. I just wanted to tell everyone that I will email out the sheets that he showed. So if that's something you're interested in, don't worry, you'll get it.
Yeah, and on the one that I mentioned, let's see if I can go backwards. Oh, I guess I got to share my screen again to do that. Resume share, do this. If you, this one here, if you just go to my blog and just scroll down through the blog, it's about 5 or 6 post entries down, and there's a download of this exact form. The one Jasmine has is the brand new one, which was the different steps that we just kind of walked through talking about disclosure. And that's hot off the press as of this morning. So she is the only person other than me that has a copy right now.
Yeah, you bring up a good point, Tim. Your website right there, timgoldstein.com, is a really great resource for anyone out there that's looking to get some more information about Tim. He has a blog. He has a book, like I had mentioned. And so there's even also kind of a, not a test, Tim, but it's a, anyway.
I'll tell you what it is, because you're right. It's not a test. It's not designed to be diagnostic, which is what a lot of people assume. what it's designed is, I use this terminology called interactional alignment, meaning how well would that person fit into this particular given situation? If they have to be a frontline type person, dealing with customers, but they have challenge talking in real time, we're not looking at really good alignment. That's going to be a problem. So yes, that's what it is. It's a little test that you can actually use. It gives you these radar charts that show where your strengths and where your weaknesses are. And it's amazing when you hand it to somebody who has worked particularly with autistic individuals. They can sit down it and pretty much know where their challenges are and what they've got to start working on to help that person, navigate the world better. So that's on the site. It's reference to it. It's free. You can take the test all you want, and it's pretty cool. And it's actually pretty accurate. I had my wife go and take it, not for her, but fill it in on me. And she actually came up with one that was virtually identical to the one I filled out on myself. So to me, that kind of validates that, if somebody knows you well, it's pretty accurate of what it's telling you.
Yeah, so I want to highlight that Tim did speak a lot about autism being on the spectrum as one of the disabilities that you might have to disclose. But for those of you that are not on the spectrum, I think there's still a lot of overlap. Some of us might have invisible, and some of us might have visible disabilities. And this is a safe place to bring all of those up and to gain a little bit of insight on maybe your own specific story for either yourself or your client. I've had a lot of questions around, well, what if I just have PTSD? Right? Or what if I have a tremor in my left hand? So differences between invisible and visible can oftentimes lead to different ways that you'd want to approach it. So does anyone have a question for Tim, or a scenario that they want to get some feedback on?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. So, not to be super picky, but I'm just wondering if the condition is mental health related, if it's better to, like a lot of people in the disability community say, I'm not my disability, like I'm not autistic, I'm a person who's on the spectrum. And I'm just wondering how important that is when you're disclosing.
As far as when you're disclosing, I don't think it makes any difference, because the chance that the person on the other end that you're disclosing to understands the nuance between being a person with a condition versus being the condition, that's a fine nuance. I mean, that's something, we talk about in the community, or if you have a condition, you certainly talk about it. But most people don't understand that. So I wouldn't worry about it too much at all when you're disclosing. And if you're with a person, maybe it's finally a DEI you're talking to or something, and there is somebody that understands, different mental conditions and the condition you have. Well, with them, they're going to ask some more questions anyways, and you're going to know you're talking to somebody that understands what the difference is.
But shouldn't we educate them?
Well,
that it's important.
The problem is there's no standard of which one's right. We had a meeting, again, this is at Google, it's their Disability Alliance. I join the meetings when I can. And, what I was bringing up was, under the banner of disability, there's a huge number of populations that don't consider themselves disabled. For instance, I don't consider myself disabled, but I surely fall under the ADA, which means I fall under disability. So in those cases, I identify as being autistic. That is my identity. So I'm an autistic person, because you can't take the autism away from me and still have me. I would not be me if I wasn't autistic. So to me, that just logic, this is autism logic, is I have to be autistic, because if you separated autism from me, I'm no longer who I am. I'm a different person. Whereas if what you have is maybe a mobility problem or a heart problem or something like that, if you separated that condition, you got them a new heart, you got them, legs, whatever it was that, makes them whole, they're still the same person. They still think the same way. They still process the same way. So to me, that's the difference between person with versus identity. But I think from the purpose of disclosing, why take on educating them when the whole idea of disclosing is simply to make your journey through the company be smoother? Now, if you want to take it on as a self-advocate because you care enough that you're willing, I'm with you. Let's go for it. But if you're doing it from the standpoint of simply, I want to be employed and stay employed, I wouldn't. If anything, it just comes across as being a nitpicky person to them at that point because they're already overwhelmed because nobody's probably ever sat down and told them that. I'll tell you, none of my managers that I told have ever had anybody sit down in their first meeting and say, "Hey, by the way, I'm autistic." So that's why I say, just to me, it doesn't add any value, and it just becomes a picky point, unless you're doing it from the standpoint of, yes, we should be making more awareness and education, as an advocacy. Does that make sense?
Probably muted, Mary.
Yeah, I think you're muted, Mary. Well, I'm going to go on. There's actually a question here in the chat, which says, what would your be advice? It's a lot far enough away, so bear with me as I'm trying to read this thing. What would your advice be for folks who worry how confidential their workplace will be with the information disclosed? That is a challenge. The first thing is you do have to recognize that your organization already has lots of information that you would not want disclosed, and they're pretty good at protecting those pieces of information. I think most mid and larger size organizations are pretty good about it because they realize all the legalities that are around it. Smaller size organizations, I would have much more concern about it getting around. And to me, it would be more if that company was very, oriented towards, hiring disabled people, differently abled, or however we want to state it. Then I'd probably be okay that everybody knew, because I'm going to a company where, I can already see their values are to support and, to hire and keep those, people that are like me. On the other hand, if it was a small company and I didn't see that kind of support, I probably wouldn't tell them. That would be my, kind of feel on it. And I would take the chance that they would go Google me. But there's there's no yes or no answers. But those are kind of some of the things I think you really need to think about is, first off, they already have a lot of really sensitive information about you. So what's one more piece of sensitive information? If you can trust them with the first ones, you should be able to trust them with the second one. And then secondly, if I think they're going to leak it, what's the company's overall viewpoint on individuals that are like me? If their viewpoint is positive, that they're making huge efforts, it's part of company commitments, great, let them say who I am. It's furthering the cause. It's good for everybody then. But if I was at the type of company where it was quite obvious that they weren't big supporters, again, there'd be no big advantages, only be disadvantages, I think, then.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
Yeah. So is there any advantage in sort of connecting your disability to somebody in popular culture? Like, for example, I have Asperger's. So saying, hey, have you ever heard of Sheldon from the kind of the most common standout in pop culture? Is there any benefit in sort of using that to connect people to get an idea of what you're talking about specifically?
Yes, 1,000%. To me, that is actually one of the big challenges from not just autism, any of the neurodistinct, things. We think differently. It doesn't matter whether it's ADHD. I mean, they think differently than autistic. I mean, we have a lot of similarities, but so yeah, I don't know. Give me the question again until I can be a little more succinct about the answer. I got myself wandering here.
Well, like so trying to connect it to somebody from mainstream culture, like for example, with Asperger's, saying Sheldon Cooper from The Big Bang Theory.
I don't know if personally I would use Sheldon. You know, and the only reason is yes, he certainly has aspects that we would, you know, attribute to autism, but on the other hand, he has lots of things that, you know, aren't probably a great example. But the tying it together, though, I'm 100% behind that. I personally try to find people that actually are, you know, living people, and that they don't have to be alive, but, you know, people that are thought to have autism or are alive and known to have autism. You know, for instance, Steve Jobs was thought to have autism. So if I'm talking to anybody who has, you know, if I see an Apple device laying anywhere around, then, you know, I'd use Steve Jobs. It'd be a great example. So I just like them because you're now portraying a real live person. But either one would be a lot better than just saying I'm autistic and leaving them with nothing. You know, that, you know, either way, they're getting a better picture. I just like to use real live people so they can, you know, recognize that real humans are like this. It's not just fictitious humans. But matter of fact, it could be your brother, it could be your coworker, it could be your aunt, it could be your uncle, it could be anybody.
I just suggest that because that's somebody that almost everybody would know, and that's something that's kind of permeated sort of mainstream culture and would be a common person that sort of everybody knows what you're talking about when you say that person's name. So I'm kind of looking at the highest profile person I can think of, like, you know, highest profile thing I can think of.
You know, nothing wrong with it by any means. I mean, again, you've got to go with what's comfortable with you and feel represents the way that you express and show up well. And if Sheldon is a good example, then, you know, that works. Again, I just like to tie it to real people because when it's a real person, I think it has just more impact. I mean, you talk about Susan Boyle. I mean, most people have heard Susan Boyle. I mean, she was, you know, discovered on, you know, UK or Britain or whatever they call it, Loves Music. And, you know, she's autistic and she's a phenomenal singer. So a lot of people know who she is. Daryl Hannah, you know, actress. A lot of people know who she is. Eminem, musician. A lot of people know who he is. He's autistic. You know, we could take Einstein. We can go down the list. So I always just try to find one that I think they would resonate with that is a real person, just because to me, that's a little more solid than a fictitious person, but either one is 100% better than, I'd say probably almost 500% better than just saying I'm autistic and leaving them with that.
Well, I think it's interesting that you say that because I know almost all those people, like I'm familiar with almost all those individuals, but I didn't know those people were autistic.
See, that's why it's actually such a big surprise, is because most people know who they are, but they don't know that they're autistic. See, and that's almost the negative of using the Sheldon, because they know he's autistic and then they assume that's what autism always looks like. It's more of a kind of a shock value when you name somebody they know, and then you say, by the way, they're autistic. And it's like, oh my gosh, if I could like them before, I guess I still got to keep liking them. So that's, again, that's just, you know, it's kind of like a little nuance to it, but no, I agree with you. If you don't give them some kind of picture or understanding, you know, that's the do your research and give them materials, you know, and different people, different things would work. But yeah, I couldn't stress that. That's just, yeah, super important. You hit a real good key of give them something to relate to that they understand in their world. Even if it's not exactly you, if they can relate to it, it will transmit more than trying to transmit exactly you that they can't relate to. Wonderful. I appreciate it. That's a great question. Let's see. We got another one here that, let's see. I feel it is necessary to disclose, necessary to disclose than not to. It may come back and haunt, by the way. Thank you for disclosing your autism. I have no idea a person can be diagnosed with it late in life. Yes, you know, there's a couple of things that you got in here that kind of pack all together. You know, starting from the bottom is, you're 100% right. That's one of the challenges that we actually have with autism nowadays is most people, even people that are around it frequently, because it's usually around it with kids, don't recognize that autistic kids become autistic adults. You know, we've just learned, you know, to be better about not shaking our hands in meetings and stuff, but we're still just as autistic as, you know, we always were. You know, as an adult, you're supposed to gain a little bit better control and such over your things. So I would say, my emotional state, I've made it to about 30. I'm really 60, but I made it to about 30 emotionally, I think, finally, which is about good enough to navigate, in a company these days. So as far as the older part, I don't know. In the autism group that we meet with at Google, there tends to be 10 to 15 people showing up. And out of those 10 to 15 people, 50% of them, I would say, definitely put in the middle age or older, and all of them were diagnosed late in life. So
Wow.
I think late in life diagnosis is way, way more common than we recognize. In the tech industry, it's actually funny. And when I first started speaking about it and writing my book and such, I wasn't comfortable with autism yet. I wasn't willing to say I'm autistic yet. So the terminology I used was the challenging technical worker. And again, we recognize there's other skill sets within people that are neurodistinct and autistic. But I'm in tech. I work in tech. It's where I was working in. So I did it around that. And the funny part is, you can go talk to the HR person or any of the managers in the IT department and say, tell me about your challenging and bright technical person. And they're going to describe an autistic person 99% of the time. So it's just really interesting that they're there. They don't know they're there, and they're judging them as if they're neurotypical. So that person who is bright but challenging is being judged as being challenging because maybe they come off as being arrogant, because they're trying to explain everything using the precise and proper words, because their entire life they've been beat up over being wrong all their life. So now they're trying to be exactly right. Except what happens when somebody talks to you and talks over your head at a higher level? They're using PhD words. They make you feel stupid. Nobody likes feeling stupid. I'm not stupid. You're making me feel stupid. Matter of fact, I don't even like you because you made me feel stupid. So that's, kind of another piece that mixes in there somewhere.
That's fascinating.
Okay.
I've got a 27-year-old son who is autistic. And he wasn't diagnosed until he was about 3 years old. And to me, when you find out that you have a special needs child, your whole dreams go out the door. Okay. There's no smart kid. There's no athletic kid. There's no popular kid. He proved me wrong. Oh yes. Oh yes. The boy graduated with honors from high school, and I cried. He was a great swimmer for Special Olympics, gave that up because he got tired of it. I can't take him anywhere without running into any former classmates or former teachers. And it's like, thank God I had you.
Yep.
Yes. But being, 6 years ago, wow, that's fascinating. That really, truly is. And I am totally dumbfounded, but I know about Daryl Hannah, and I love Susan Boyle. Oh my God, her music, she gives me goosebumps.
Amazing. She's amazing.
Yes. But I have a hunch that some people, even normal people, what they may not know is that they may have just a slight amount of autism in them. They just don't know it.
Well, I describe it a little differently because to me, autism means a specific thing. So the way I describe it, and I don't know, I'll try and see if I can convince you, is
Okay.
There is no such thing as an autistic trait. There's no such thing as an ADHD trait. There's no such thing as an OCD trait, because we can go find people that we would all agree are neurotypicals that display, one of those traits. I mean, how many neurotypicals have you run into that have a challenge looking you in the eye when they speak? I mean, it's less common among neurotypicals, but there's certainly plenty of them.
Right.
We can find every one. How many neurotypicals have you found that talk in such a monotone and so flat that you think they're dead? They're not autistic, but so I just think of it as this way. It's all human traits. It's just that if they're at a certain level, too high or too low, then we put this name around it.
Uh-huh.
But it's not a different trait. I mean, it's the exact same trait that a neurotypical has. It's just that, there's some additional traits with it, and maybe there's a compounding effect because of the additional traits, or maybe the person has just not learned how to bridge the gap between their differences and the rest of the world, because as much as the rest of the world should change, we can change ourselves a lot faster than we can change the world. Not stopping me from trying to change the world, but do what you can first.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
There was another one in here that was somebody was asking about, just to clarify, if you go in and you divulge to HR, so you disclose to HR, if they follow all the legal things that they should be doing, they should never be telling anybody that you are whatever you disclosed. So if you have a manager, you actually need to disclose to that manager yourself, because it was voluntarily given information, but it is, sensitive information, which is why they can't disclose it themselves. But you can tell as many people as you want because it's your information. So yes, if you go to a manager, you need to tell that manager if, disclosing fits you. You change departments, or manager gets changed on you, you're going to have to go do that again, because legally they're not supposed to be telling each other. Now, does it happen? Yeah, I'll say at my last job, my manager went over to my new manager and told him I was autistic, and then she sold him on the whole deal of why he should take me into his department. So, I was fine with it, but, legitimately, no, that's not what companies are supposed to do. Let's see. Oh, yeah. Somebody was saying in here, well, actually, I think it was kind of the earlier meeting, just talking about disclosing coming back to haunt you. And yes, I mean, the answer is it can. But the way it's going to come back and haunt you again is going to be the kind of thing that would be similar to why or not you were disclosed in the first place. If you're at a company that, and especially if you're already there, so now you know the company a lot better. If it's the kind of company that's doing nothing around DEI, doing nothing around disability, they're doing nothing about anything, progressing to a better world. Yeah, of course it's going to come back and haunt you, because they're just not even involved in the whole thing and probably don't think that you're, up to the abilities of everybody else. Instead of looking at what you can do, they're looking at what you can't do. If we looked at neurotypicals that way, we wouldn't hire them either. But unfortunately, we don't look at them that way. So, yeah, yes. I mean, the answer is yes, it can come back to haunt you in many ways. It can come back to haunt you in that you told a coworker and the coworker told another coworker. Well, the coworker is under a whole lot less, laws and, HIPAA regulations and all that than if you had told a manager or HR. They're basically under none. If you share it with a friend, they can share it with whoever they want. It's just how good's the friend. So you're right. It can echo back around at times and come back to you. But if you're at a company that treasures it, the best thing you can do is declare. This morning, as a matter of fact, in this global learning team, we had a meeting. It was a 7:15 a.m. meeting, and we had participants all the way from Europe, all the way through Singapore. So they're, we're a worldwide organization. And there was a brand new director that has just joined and wanted to meet all of us and wanted us to all give a quick introduction. And then also asked to give a little something that nobody else would know about us. So when it was my turn, I said, I'm not going to tell something that nobody knows about me. I'm going to tell something that everybody knows about me except you. I'm autistic and I'm a major self-advocate. That for me was fine. I mean, here I'm telling the director, and the answer is DEI and such is so important at Google nowadays that his answer was, I want to talk to you more about it. So again, it just depends upon the organization. Is this an organization that, is tied in? It's involved with supporting maybe a disability in or a Bayaud or, depending how big or small, whether it's a local or, national type organization. If they are, it's probably really safe to be open about it. And if anything, they're going to like the fact that you're trying to help the same things they're trying to move the company towards. But if your company doesn't do those kind of things, yeah, what can I say? There's companies that still run like it's the military. And, we gave up the military method of management, I think 40 years ago or something.
Tim, I think Adam has a question.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, thanks. You kind of spoke into this, Tim, but what, in an interview setting, if an individual is to disclose, what kind of response can they expect, and how, I'm just asking through the lens of helping our clients like prepare for interviews. So what can they expect if they feel it's appropriate to disclose? What can
Well,
they
of course, we all go back to, we all understand that companies vary from, ones that would do nothing and roll the clock backwards if they could, to ones that are, trying to create a better future. But with that said, I think disclosing in the interview, unless of course you have, like myself, some reasons. As soon as they Google me, they'll find me, so I better tell them myself. Unless you have some of the reasons like that, if you are able to do interviews without needing any accommodations, I wouldn't actually tell them in the interview process. Why give them another thing that, even though they may have had all kinds of unconscious bias training against, disabled, to not be biased and all that. Come on, we're humans. It doesn't matter how many bias trainings you take, you still can't get rid of all your bias. So that's my approach in the interview is, if it's an interview that I feel I don't need any supports for, then I don't mention it. And I just go in like I'm anybody else. On the other hand, if I need accommodations, then I would definitely mention it. And at that point, when they respond, if they respond with, okay, well, how can we accommodate you? You're dealing with a company that understands, how this is supposed to work. On the other hand, if they kind of give you the blank look and say, yeah, you could then bring back, well, is it possible to have an accommodation at this interview to give me, whatever it is, a little bit of time to think about a question before I respond, because I like to, it works better if I can write down a few notes to myself first, whatever it is. So again, a little complicated. And sometimes the response will be, yes, we have a process and we know how to accommodate that. Let us get you with the right people so we can get you the correct support so you can have a good interview experience. A lot of them are going to just give you the, that's nice. In which case you need to tell them what it is they're really supposed to be doing to help you.
That's awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Tim, I sometimes get a lot of questions from clients that have more of a visible disability, maybe a tremor or some type of twitch, things like that. What's your guidance? What would you say to someone that has a visible disability regarding disclosing in an interview? Would you think it's more appropriate, or would you say, hey, there's really no reason to do that unless you need an accommodation, kind of like what you had just
I would
mentioned?
put it under the same thing of being, why unless you need an accommodation? I mean, a twitch or something isn't, super impactful at an interview. And of course, there's always some compensatory strategies. I sit in interviews and play with pens and pencils all day long. If you happen to have twitches, it's kind of like you have two hands together. It stops a lot of that stuff. And nobody thinks anything about you fiddling with a pen or pencil in an interview. It's like they expect you to be nervous. It's okay.
What about asking for accommodations once you get the job? Who's the best human to talk to? And are we supposed to be thinking about how much it's going to cost the company?
Well, we know that the way the ADA law is written, it says that it has to be a reasonable accommodation. So yes, cost factor comes in because, if they're hiring a person that's a, $20 an hour job, which works out to roughly 40K, you can't ask for a 10K accommodation. That's just not going to be deemed as being reasonable to the company to pay 25% of your salary to make an accommodation. So yes, I think from one's point, yes, you do need to think about accommodation costs to a certain extent, but There was a study that Cornell did in their Industrial Labor Relations College, which was the first labor relation college in the entire world, and in their Institute of Disability Studies. And what they found was the average person asking for a autism accommodation cost $100. And the average person asking for any other type of accommodation, just separate autism out and just all the other accommodations, was about $270 or $280. I mean, that's the average. It's not huge amounts of money. Companies are thinking it's thousands and thousands. No, that's the statistical average of, Cornell going and doing research on it. It's not a huge amount to accommodate. I think the bigger part of accommodating isn't the physical cost changes, it's the interpersonal and communication changes that are required. And those cost nothing except for, taking the trouble to learn how to communicate better. And then you won't just be communicating better with a neurodistinct person, you'll be better at communicating with everybody on your team. Because again, you get rid of all the ambiguity. This is an example, a funny one. I was working with both a professor from Cornell and Vanderbilt on Monday on a National Science Foundation project that they're doing that are checking up on autistic individuals who are in employment and how's it going, where's the troubleshot, problems and all that. And they had in there, one of the questions was broadly describe your job. Well, how the heck? I don't know what broadly means. I mean, is it one sentence? Well, it's probably not one sentence. It seems like it should probably be more because the box was bigger than that. But, is it 12 pages worth? I have no clue. So really, that's where the big accommodations need to come in autism aren't things that cost, it's things that people need to think about. Just saying it the right way, that words have exact meanings and we use the exact meanings. But if you use it in a more general sense, then we're not going to understand what you said. Or we're going to respond wrongly because we assumed it was something else you were talking about because you already used this word, if that's what you really meant.
Yeah, and then you would probably say HR is the...
As far as where to disclose to, that's right, I saw that in there. You're going to have to ask around in the company because it varies in each company as to where it's handled. In some companies, it's handled under HR. Some companies actually will move it to DEI. In some companies, your best approach, and this tends to be bigger companies, is they often will have employee resource groups, or they may call it something else, team resource groups or whatever, but employee resource groups is the most common name. And most major corporations have a disability employee resource group. So when you want to go in and find out about it, but not have to go talk to HR or anything, you go to the employee resource group about it. And here's a whole bunch of people that have disabilities themselves that can tell you about, well, in this company, this is what to do. This is where you go. This is the person to talk to. It's this group that handles that kind of stuff. At Google, I think they sit under HR, I'm not sure. There's a specific dedicated team just for accommodations. So at Google, no, you wouldn't go to general HR, you would go to the specific team. And like I say, I don't even know if they're under HR or not under HR. So yeah, you got to ask around and find out in that company who is, but I would always recommend if there's an employee resource group, go get to know them and chat with them. Set a meeting up with the president of the employee resource group and say, I've got whatever. How can I help you and how can you help me? And they've already been there. They know the ropes. They're dealing with accommodations regularly, and it's comfortable because you're not divulging to management at that point. This is like pre-management. You get to have a good conversation.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Does anyone have any more questions? I have one, Tim.
I was expecting you. You always have a hard one too.
I've had some people ask me when it does pop up on an application, job application. Do you have a disability? What's up with that? Do you have
Well,
to say yes? Can you lie? Can you say no? Can you just not mark the box? What's up with that?
well, almost always it will say voluntary above it. And if it doesn't say voluntary, it actually should, because it really is voluntary information.
Okay.
And so can you not answer it? The answer is yes, you normally could just skip it and nobody would question it. On the other hand, there's times where that is actually to your benefit to check it. And some of the cases that it would be to your benefit to check it is you're going to apply for a job with some branch of the government, federal, state, doesn't matter what branch. Virtually all of them either have carve-outs or holdouts or programs or some way that they're trying to be more inclusive and hire through a more diverse, including disability group. So there it would be a benefit because it would put you into a group that they're looking to try and increase numbers on. If you're working for or trying to get a job with a major government contractor, and major actually is not even really the term, because I think, I'm no expert on it, but I think the way it works is if you have more than $500,000 contract with the federal government, which is not huge. I mean, you don't have to be Boeing to have a $500,000 contract, $500,000 contract. There's plenty of small shops here in town that have federal contracts for, more than that. But they want all of their vendors to have 7% disabled employment. And that's actually a targeted goal that they're aiming for. And now this is out of date. It was from a few years ago, but a few years ago, it was only, Grumman Northrop, I think, that was the only company that actually had hit 7%. Everybody else was still trying to get there. So that's another case where they actually are courting workers because they have quotas that they're supposed to be targeting. And if you don't check the box, then they don't know you're one of those people that are in the area that there's government regulation saying, do something over here. So that's why sometimes it can be very advantageous to check it. And again, it really comes down to study the company. Are they oriented towards being progressive in this area? And if they are, checking it's probably the better answer.
Right. Like they like to hire those with disabilities to fill our government contracts and the like. I mean, we're very
Exactly. I mean, there's all different programs. I mean, some of them are state level. I mean, Google is doing it from just their own internal commitment levels. So yeah, it can come from all levels, but there's a lot of companies that are trying very, very hard now to get more diverse with all these groups that, haven't traditionally had good employment experiences. I mean, it's not just the Black X and the Latina X and the LGBT, it's also the disabled, it's a lot of progressive companies that checking the box would be a smart thing to do.
Right. Tim, what are some examples of unreasonable accommodations? Do those exist? Other than the money, you had mentioned how much does it cost, right? But like outside of that, I mean, what's unreasonable?
What's unreasonable? Anything that would make it so that you couldn't do, or what would I say? I mean, the way that the law really says is it's got to be reasonable, and with that accommodation, you need to be able to do your core essential duties. So I heard of people who have tried to get accommodations that were around their non-essential duties. So that one usually doesn't fly because that isn't enabling their real duty of what they're doing there. So, it may be that they wanted to be able to work from home 5 days a week because, that's what they wanted to do. And let's just say that they could do their job remotely that, technically would be fully feasible. That in many companies would be considered unrealistic. If the company doesn't have a work at home policy, it has some, you now have a problem of trying to manage this person who's totally out of the loop of everything. So I've seen where that's been deemed as being, not reasonable because the company is not really set up to do. Of course, after COVID now, that's going to be a harder excuse to pull than it used to be before COVID. Now they've had the people all working at home. So now how do you say you can't work at home when, they just kept the company alive for a year by working at home? So I think that one is a little more, might be fading away. Some other unreasonable ones. When Google sent everybody home, from the offices, one of the autistic individuals asked, and asked honestly, seriously, they weren't joking, they were serious. Will Google expense my meals now for each lunch because I can't eat, the lunches in the cafeteria anymore? Or lunches and dinner, actually, yeah, down lunches and dinner. That's a non-reasonable accommodation. Just because you're autistic and may not be capable of cooking, there's nothing that says an employer needs to feed you. The fact that Google is generous enough to feed their employees on a regular basis is just that they're generous. It has nothing to do with any requirement to continue it if you work at home. So that one you can see though, where they're really saying, if this is what I had every day, I'm now working in a different area. Are you going to make up for that, accommodate it in some way?
Right.
Because it made my life easier because I didn't have to cook and I didn't have to plan lunches. So it worked better for me. And so you can spin that into being an accommodation of sorts, but no, doesn't fly.
One that that you might have some thoughts on that I've gotten a couple times is whether or not marijuana is a reasonable accommodation. What are your thoughts?
Well, there's my personal thoughts and then there's the legal thoughts about it. But personally, yeah, it should be a reasonable accommodation. That's personal thoughts. On the other hand, legally, no, it is not considered a legitimate accommodation because the federal laws, and ADA is a federal law. So you're totally in the federal system now. It's illegal. It's a Schedule I drug still.
Right.
So even though it's 100% legal in this state, medical or recreational, no, it's actually an illegal accommodation because you're violating federal law and you're really trying to follow federal law.
Okay. Well, I want to encourage anyone that has any topical questions, anything they've come up against in their own job journey or their client's job journey. Any questions? Any last last ditch effort at getting some advice from Tim?
Well, I'd like to ask the question of them of simply, what's the biggest challenge they've seen with a neurodistinct individual in the workplace or getting them in the workplace?
Good question.
Well, I can speak to one of my biggest challenges. One of my biggest challenges is because I don't process nonverbal language correctly. I don't do well around strange dogs. And when people bring in their dogs, I react very badly to that. And I have problems with that. And I've had real trouble at my employer dealing with that situation because people bring their dogs in on a regular basis, and it stresses me out and it causes me to react badly, and it causes me to have severe anxiety around that. And that's one of my biggest issues has been dealing with that because of the way that I don't process nonverbal information.
I can relate to that so well, and for different reasons. I grew up on a farm in the country where, of course, dogs weren't normally leashed in the country. It's a farm. And I don't know how many times I got bit, got knocked off a bicycle, ended up in the hospital, knocked out from dogs, So different reasons, but I have a fear of dogs, I basically would have to say myself. Different reason why we got there, but it's the same thing. Again, I joined Google since COVID, so I haven't actually worked in a Google office. They do allow some dogs, but the company I was with before that Google acquired was even more dog friendly than Google is. And you could bring your dog in every single day of the week if you wanted. And I had a problem with it. Truthfully, like you, it just creeps me out. It's like it's shades of just things reflecting back from back deep in your memory of getting bit and getting attacked and all that kind of crap. And I never pursued it because I primarily didn't work in the office. That was just when I'd be visiting one of the offices for a day or something. I primarily worked at home, so I was able to just stuff it basically, for the day or two I was in the office. But if it was long term, I would actually have to, I would be bringing it up personally. As this is a challenge for me. I don't have anything against dogs. Dogs are wonderful. Dogs are great people, but my brain just doesn't do good with them.
Well, it jades things, and then I get a reputation around the place to where new employees will come up there that are new, and I'll introduce myself, and they'll be like, "Oh, you're the guy that hates dogs," and so you get a bit of a reputation, and it becomes a bit of an issue, and people don't,
Well,
it becomes an issue, and I don't know how to deal with it all the time.
I would actually take that. If somebody came to me and took something as being, "Oh, you're the person who does X," fill in X, hates dogs is good enough. It could be, any of 100 other different things. I would use that as the world's best intro to why they want to have a conversation about autism. They didn't know they wanted to have a conversation about autism, but they just opened themselves up to wanting to have a conversation about autism because they're obviously not aware of what the issue is you're really dealing with. It's not that you hate dogs, you hate being made to feel like you can't be comfortable in your own desk.
Well, I don't understand. My brain doesn't process that nonverbal information correctly. And so I don't know how to react.
Yeah. And I say for mine, it's a little different, but it's the same thing of I don't know what to do about it. I'm just my brain's freaking out, but I don't know what to do about it. So to me, yeah, if that reputation, the way I always handle it is I just address it exactly of what it is. Oh, you obviously don't know much about autism. Let me tell you a little bit about it. And this is why I don't relate well to the dogs, because I really don't, I just don't have that sense of what they're going to do and such, because I don't process the emotion, and it really puts me on edge because I don't know what the heck they're going to do. I mean, so again, to me, it's just an intro to educate more people about, well, when you think about it, I mean, you obviously speak just fine. I mean, you have no problem looking at camera, looking at the eye. I mean, you'd pass for neurotypical, most of the time. And most people don't think of that as being somebody who is autistic or a different neurodistinction. So, I would almost say, I challenge you to be enough of an advocate that you would just explain the real reason why. No, it's not that I hate dogs. The problem is I'm autistic and I have a very hard time processing what's going on when I'm around dogs.
Tim, I really like that. That's a really powerful lead-in and really good advice for people. Just kind of flip it and turn it into an intro about an educational intro.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, what were they? They were bringing this up for a reason because they wanted to understand why you're such a jerk that you don't like dogs. Well, good. You have the perfect answer. They just didn't know that that's the answer they were coming to get.
Leah had an observation. She says that her observation has been that there's few employment options for people who aren't comfortable working with people. For example, customers, groups of people, due to a disability, and they don't have a high level of education, especially if they have physical disabilities / pain as well.
Yes, that is a generally true statement. I mean, when we overall look at the U.S. economy and we look at the wages, to different ranges and all those kind of things, we do certainly see that when you have lower education, you do tend to have less job opportunities, and they tend to be more service, public-oriented type jobs than people who have higher educational experiences. So it does make it really challenging. But the trick is really, and this is what I've always done, is I always just chased after whatever was my special interest. And if my special interest was doing machining, then I'd go work at a machine shop. And yes, there's people in a machine shop, but I didn't care because I was doing my special interest and I wanted to learn it. So I needed the people there to tell me how to do this stuff. But I don't have the good answer, because part of the problem really here is we have a, what can we say? Not necessarily well-aligned economy to the needs of the general populace, where we do have people that if they don't have the, lucky role of ending up in a school district where they get a good education, they're going to have much more challenges throughout life. And it's unfortunate, but we've done so much of taking away the trades. And this really, I think, was the old way that we used to do it when I, joined the workforce. Was a lot of us autistic individuals went into the trades. And, if you're a carpenter and you're framing a house, how many people do you talk to in a day? 2, 3, maybe, and they're busy. They're just like passing through, or it's the supervisor saying like, do this, they're off, But we've devalued the trades. It's no longer looked at as being respectable jobs. I mean, when I was growing up, my dad was a diesel mechanic. He made a darn good living, blue collar, and it was considered a respectable job. Now blue collar jobs are, if you're not in high tech and white collar, then, it's not even a job. But out of that, we've lost a huge amount of opportunity to employ people who have lower educational opportunities. Not that they're not smart enough, it's just whatever. They didn't have the reason to go, or they went to a crappy school district. I mean, these, were unlucky enough to be born in an area that had crappy schools. And when you get, the trades were always so good because how are trades taught? You don't go and sit in a class and learn a trade. You learn a trade by being the helper to the person that knows how to do it. And you work side by side with them. And, after about a month, they teach you to actually learn to know what thing that they actually need next. So that you can, hand them the right thing at the right time. And, over a couple of years, they start teaching it to you. And again, to me, that's the big miss for that area is, we don't have the manufacturing lines. We don't have the trades we used to have. I mean, you think about it. If you were working on a manufacturing line, if those were still around very much, you don't have time to talk to the people around you. Yes, there's people around you, but you have a job to do. You've got numbers to hit, and you focus on what you're doing, which actually tends to be, for me, pretty interesting to try and get it exactly right every single time. So I actually find it challenging, and, you're not interacting with the other people. You're not, customer facing. So I would try and find something in those manufacturing kind of roles, the things that still exist. Print shops are kind of dying, but that used to be a great employment place for people with neurodistinctions. Again, it's just kind of the whole cultural change. We've gotten to people are interchangeable on jobs from, 30 years ago, where people were your employees that you kept forever, and you trained them and helped them grow.
Tim, you reminded me actually of a couple things. One, we have some DVR counselors on here, but and some clients and a whole slew of people, but we also have the executive director and job trainer at Good Turn Cycles. That's Adam Taylor. You can see his name on the screen. But anyway, I encourage anyone to reach out to them. They do a job training program to tune bicycles, put them together. I'm mincing words here, Adam, I am sorry, but it's a job training program, and they currently have one of our clients there that is on the spectrum, and it's extremely beneficial for them. It's a paid opportunity. So anyway, you kind of had sparked that a little bit, so I wanted to do a shout out.
It's actually funny though you say bicycles, because my first career was in the bicycle industry, and I started out as what's referred to as a mounter. And a mounter is the person, at least in the terminology they use where I started in it, is the person that opens the bike box, takes all the wrapping off of it, puts the components on it, and then hands it to a real mechanic to make sure that it's actually safe to ride. So in other words, it's about as low as you can get and get a paycheck at a bike shop. And I started there and went all the way through to doing international supply chains and national sales teams.
Well, there you go. Yeah.
Bike industry was, for me, that was probably one of the best experiences ever. And probably a lot of what got me to be comfortable talking when dealing with the public, because I was a bike nut. I mean, I was such a bike nut that my mother told me before Christmas that if I hear another thing about a bike, every time I hear it, I'm taking $1 away of what I was going to give you to get the bike you want to get. That's how annoying I was about it. But when I had to talk to customers and such, it wasn't a problem because I was talking about my special interest. It wasn't like I was doing a sales job or anything. It was just talking about what I love. So I
Yes.
love that you're doing doing it around the bike stuff, because again, that's that you go in, somebody mentors you. You don't learn by just reading a book. Somebody's there next to you that teaches you and helps you and says, no, next time do it this way. And so phenomenal. I didn't know about it, Adam, but so great to hear about it, and would love to catch up with you.
Yeah, I'll email you guys each other's emails so that you can
Please.
be in touch. But any final thoughts? I know I had kind of interrupted someone. I don't know who, but I interrupted someone. There's something popping up in the chat here. I think there's a huge
I'm kind of
difference.
reading through the chat one here just to figure out how to answer it then.
I'm looking at Josh's. I think there's a huge difference between experiential experience and educational experience. The workforce today seems to value the educational experience, while a lot of the people on the spectrum or with a disability seem to do better experientially. Yeah. Skills-based hiring is a huge thing that I think
Yes,
pivoting more towards
I'm
that
with
should be good.
I'm with that one 100%, and it's really true. A lot of companies have turned to, oh, you've got to have a degree to do whatever. I mean, the stupidest thing that doesn't require a degree whatsoever to be capable of doing it, but they've got the requirement in there. You've got to have a degree, and that it is challenging. For instance, at Google, I mean, the reality is I would never have been hired by Google directly, never. I'm a college dropout, I don't have any degree, but much less a degree in a different field. I don't even have one. And it was community college I dropped out of. I mean, it doesn't get any lower. But on the other hand, they're more than happy to have me while they have me there. And it's opening some eyes of maybe we are evaluating some wrong things at times of just, looking at only a degree. But that's going to be a change that takes a while. I think if I had to guess what drove it more than anything, I don't know if most people realize, but HR's primary number one job is to keep the company from getting sued. It's not to take care of employees, it's to keep the company from getting sued. That's their number one job. And that gives a very easy way to say why you picked a candidate over another candidate, because you can easily substantiate they had a degree, they didn't have a degree. So I think it just became a easy method that was easily, backed up with legitimate decisions. And it's just become the way it is now.
And then Jennifer was just saying, y'all, that she resonates with that. Her and Linda Drake were just talking about that as well. About the focus over real, true experience, skills-based knowledge versus non, especially for those with disabilities or those that are over 50.
Yes, and of course that is growing. I mean, there is a growing movement. It's tiny, but there is a growing movement in that direction. I mean, particularly in the autism, and it's really funny. They're now calling it the neurodiversity at work movement, but they're still hiring only autistic individuals. We're still trying to teach them that neurodiversity means everybody. It doesn't mean autistic. But yeah, they're in those programs, they're moving more towards doing more experiential. But unfortunately, they still require the degree.
Yeah. Tim, Jennifer just asked, do you have any thoughts about those with learning disabilities and communication? Any suggestions?
Well, again, the learning disability part comes down to making sure your supervisor, manager, whatever it is that you report to, understands what it is that you have and ways and strategies that can be worked around. I mean, if it's simply, I have a learning disability and I can't learn that thing, that's probably not going to keep you employed at the company very long. On the other hand, if you say I had a learning disability, but I learned so much better if I could go to a class on it versus trying to do it, reading it out of this book or, on an online course. That's reasonable to ask, okay, I just don't learn really well self-learned. I really need an instructor to help me. So I don't know, it's kind of a whole messy, kind of area really. And there's no standards. I mean, again, it's just company by company of what you might run into.
Yeah, and I like that you had the suggestion to create that narrative. It really helps the focus of the conversation narrow down to the point at which you're able to say, I'm not out here, I don't have a learning disability. It doesn't mean that I can't do all of this.
Right.
In fact, it just means that in this one area is where I might require more guidance. And this is what guidance looks like for me.
Exactly.
This is what, this is where you might need to check in on me, things like that.
Yeah, exactly. I had my previous manager finally got her to understand that my executive control stinks, and knowing what's the right priority to work on is a struggle for me. And when you have 15 clients you're taking care of, it's really a struggle to figure out which one you're supposed to work on. And she finally learned that what she needed to do was just give me 1, 2, 3. Here you go. Here's your 3 top priorities for the day.
There you
Bingo,
go.
I'm good.
Right, right.
So again, a lot of it is, like you say, it's that framing it that's the important part. Because if you just frame it as I have a learning disability, it's like, oh, geez, what are we going to do now? As opposed to saying, I can do really good at this, this, and this, but when I have to learn these kind of things, I really struggle unless I can have somebody that can help mentor me or can tutor me, or I have an instructor, or, another option. And of course, that isn't a huge ask for the company. Stick them with another employee that knows the thing and just let them mentor them and, answering questions for, an hour a day, once a week.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing is oftentimes we end up wondering how the manager is going to respond to us, but sometimes it's important for all of us to recognize that the manager also wants to know how to work well with everyone else. Does that make sense? I mean, being a manager, it's really nice to think that, okay, I'm able to work well with Tim. Like, he's giving me feedback that I'm doing a good job being his manager. And we have this open discourse about how I can do better as a manager, what words work well, what words don't work well. So I just brought that up just as to say that it's a two-way street, and we want to be good as managers too, right? We want to be given that opportunity to be able to be the best manager we can for everyone, all employees.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it right there. Managers at most companies don't want to be bad managers. That's not their goal. They didn't get up in the morning to see how miserable they can make everybody in their department. I mean, some did maybe, but most of them didn't get up to do that in the morning. And when you come in and you say, I'm, and fill in the blank, I'm autistic, I have this, I'm ADHD, I mean, whatever it is, doesn't matter what it is. They have no clue, unless they happen to deal with it personally, what to do about it. So you essentially gave them a problem, dumped a problem in their lap and walked away and said, it's your problem. Tell me what you want me to do. As opposed to giving them the materials to go along with it. Yes, I have a learning disability, but here you go. Here's a profile of, one of the tests that show where I'm strong and where I'm weak. And see, I'm only really weak in doing this one little, area of the whole range of learning.
Right.
And then they've got a way to go. And I think that's the trick, is you've got to educate them to the level that they can actually respond appropriately, because they haven't been studying it and living it like we have. So, it's suddenly being dropped in their lap. My manager will tell you, the one I had previously, and she's probably in her mid 40s, and she's been in the tech industry her entire career, done extremely well. I'm the first autistic person that she's ever had that she actually knows was autistic, because none of the other ones ever told her. Now, after she worked with me, she started going, as I think back, and she started recognizing ones that that the strategy she was using with me would have been much more effective. But at the time, those people didn't tell her or divulge. They just suffered silently.
Right. Well, everyone, and Tim especially, thank you guys so much for coming. I hope that we were all able to learn something that we can take back in our interview process, application process, asking for accommodation process, or if you just work with people that are that have a disability, how to really advise them, right, on, do they need to talk about this in the interview, or things of that nature. So I kind of want to end with a reminder that your guys' disability, our disability, the country's we bring diversity to the workforce, and it's important. and you're worthwhile. We all have something so amazing to offer. So just grounding ourselves with that if we ever feel like maybe there's some worry or fear about our worth in regards to being a valuable employee. You're an invaluable employee, so are all of our clients. And so I just want to end with that reminder.
That is a wonderful, wonderful reminder. And I'll just real fast just add an anecdote to it. It comes up regularly in discussions in the autism group at Google about somebody saying, I don't feel like I really belong here. It just doesn't seem like, how the heck am I here? And the answer we all give them is real simple. They hired you. You work for Google. Trust me, you fit.
Right. Yeah. Your foot's in the door. A lot of the tool is really in just believing in yourself and knowing it too, and just exuding that sense of worth.
Right, because
So-
everybody else around you is simply going, I know how hard it was to get in, and if you got in, you fit.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we struggle with as people with disabilities is that mind, body, spirit piece. The what goes on in our mind about our sense of worth and our self-image too. So that's a whole different bag of worms, y'all.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Acting lessons, I recommend. Acting lessons.
that's a great recommendation.
Worked for me.
There you go. So Tim and I will kind of go back and forth. I was pretty sure that handout that he had created 2 minutes before this meeting looked awesome, but I'm going to double check it, and then I'm going to send it out to everyone that was here today. Okay. And feel free to reach out if you have any questions. We're getting a lot of thank yous. So that's really for you, Tim. Thank you so much for doing this. We really appreciate it. Feel free to share this with your colleagues, with whoever you think would benefit from it. It will be on our YouTube channel in T- whatever a day.
Well, thank you so much for inviting me and letting me participate. You're doing great things there, and however I can help you, I want to.
Right back at you, Tim.
Okay.
Thank you.
We'll touch you
We'll
later.
talk later.
Thanks,
Bye,
everybody.
guys.
Bye.
Thank you.